Good morning, everyone. My name is Robert Schmid, digital IoT technologist, also known as Mr. IoT. And this week on Coffee with Mr. IoT, my co-host Rachel Moorman and I are talking with Nick and Lucas. Hello. Welcome, Nick. Welcome, Lucas. How are you doing?
Thanks for joining.
How are you?
Well, thank you for joining.
Good.
Hey, guys. We talked today, we want to talk about security and IoT and, what's going on. There is a lot of stuff out there. You are part of Deloitte, where we really focus on security, which is actually a unique aspect of what we bring to the table in our IT practice, have really a focus on security as well, and have a dedicated group that works on that. Let me start by really question, were you guys, before you joined, some hackers?
I wish, maybe in another life. No, my background's actually structural engineering. So I totally flip-flopped.
What brought you to security?
Before college, I actually thought I would go pre-med, and so I had an interest in the life sciences space, and then I got into this medical offering that Deloitte has, which also is around security, and then, engineering breaks down to designing components, whether it's security engineering, whatever it might be, so the passion kind of came across.
Got it. Lucas?
I came from a mechanical engineering background, and really I loved innovation, but I never had those hands-on hacking skills. I've been following IoT, following medical devices, and the development, really enjoyed it. And I got this interview with Deloitte, and cybersecurity, I think the week I had my interview, there were 2 major hacks. And I saw this as being something really exciting, and jumped on board and met Nick and the team, and now we're growing out our IoT security practice, and it's been a whirlwind.
Why is it such a whirlwind? Why is it growing so quickly? And maybe before we can get there, let's talk, like, how did it all begin? So you mentioned when you joined there was 2 big hacks, I think. Across the news, we hear probably some interruptions all the time as it relates to security. But what's the history look like? Where did this all start?
For IoT, you really can go all the way back to the sensor level, right? That's what we think of as IoT, is this integration of sensors, computers, everything. And so back in the 80s and 90s, when you started to see sensors more prevalent, you had limited connectivity, very limited capacity, limited ability to exchange information. And then as that grew into the 2000s, when you started having Wi-Fi, you could have more remote sensors, you had more advanced analytics, and now to today, where everything is so connected and Internet of Things is what it is. And the reason why it's that whirlwind is because people have just been advancing the technology and really thinking about security later. They haven't built it in, done security by design, when those requirements are being made to figure out what exactly the sensor needs to measure and how it's going to transmit. They don't think about, maybe I should
if I were to read back kind of why this is so different than the 80s and 90s, it's because the overwhelming abundance of sensors, but also the connectivity that drives them into the overall rest of the world. I'm guessing that drives more access points, more points of places where people can disrupt, and that's, if I'm kind of putting the pieces together, where you're saying no big deal if you kind of build it into your requirements, but if afterthought, then you have all these entry points and barriers that can't be met, and that's where people get in trouble. Is that kind of a fair?
Absolutely, yeah. Larger attack surface is what we call it.
Larger attack surface. That sounds scary. So
look,
we've heard this before. This is like a scary new world, right? Everyone's terrified of being hacked into. This seems like a reoccurring a concern that we've heard across our shows, right?
Just a little bit, and I think part of that is awareness too, right? As awareness grew, you have your black hat type attackers out there that realize they can take advantage of things that they previously didn't know of. And it also, thankfully, is driving awareness with regulatory agencies, customers alike, so that they're putting that pressure on the manufacturers to build it in so that it's not an issue.
So let me ask you a question.
At least, right?
I want to ask a very practical question. There was an article this week. It was called "Armies of Hacked IoT Devices Launched unprecedented DDoS attacks. I personally always have a bit of a reaction to fear-mongering. But the interesting part about this article is, and this has also been my experience in my past life as a CIO, most hacks actually happen through very, very simple means. And in this case, these were DVRs and cameras of people that had the default manufacturing password still on there. Give us a few of the tips that people, like the simple stuff that you always want people to do to watch out for when they do IoT. What are those sort of like really simple things? You know, we talk about passwords often being too simple, like when you use your first name of your first kid or something like this. What is the equivalent of that in IoT? Give me a few examples.
I mean, so user-related, manufacturer-related. So commonly it's just encrypt your data in transit. I mean, it's not overly complex to do if you do it up front or even after the fact. There's a lot of wired connections that you can actually, they have things out there like encrypting dongles that you can put on, you know, both ends of products and secure it that way. I mean, you want to secure while it's in transit and when it's at rest and essentially throughout its life cycle. And that's kind of what a lot of this boils down to. If you can protect data, communicate who you're communicating with, you can eliminate a lot of the security risks.
So what you said basically is that if data is in transit, make sure it's encrypted. And also when data is addressed, particularly sensitive data, make sure that's encrypted. So encryption is the thing, rather than having it like in clear text where you can just go watch it fly by and see, here is someone's password, that's what you recommend. That's what you talked about, right?
Yep, correct. And then the other side of it, which is commonly overlooked, is what's called mutual authentication. So essentially, if I'm sending something to you, Robert, we need to know that we're sending it to the correct versions of us and not rogue users. And it's increasingly important, especially when you look at the IoT devices that, especially in my space in life sciences, medical, right? If you can insert your own device and send rogue commands, you know, you could potentially impact patient safety and things of that nature. So these critical components are necessary.
So you mentioned you're in the medical world. Is there a threat or is there a concern that maybe even something as broad as like terrorism, where people could go and hack into someone's IoT-enabled pacemaker and do mass destruction that way? Is that even?
You've been watching a lot of Homeland, I take it, right? Yeah, I mean, it's something that you commonly see in the movies now. I know it started with Dick Cheney back in the day when he was talking about his pacemaker. And now you see it in the movies all the time. Is it possible? Yes. But to date, you know, there really hasn't been that motivated person trying to do it, or they've been thwarted by the security mechanisms that have been put in place.
Lucas, let me take the same question to you, and I'd like to actually ask you another question first. You know, there was this conversation about someone impersonating other people. It's so freaking easy today. Go pick my public profile pictures from Facebook, and off you go. You can create another Robert Schmid. How do you prevent that from happening? What do you do? And then
prevent it. We can only have one Robert. 2 Roberts is way too much.
No kidding. I'm with you. But okay, so 2 Rachels, that would be a good thing. But what do you do? I mean, how do you prevent this, particularly in the world of IoT?
The potential to have your identity stolen.
Not the identity stolen, but it's like these easy things where people just go and set up and pretend they're you. I'm not even talking about someone stealing my credit card information and that kind of stuff. I just talk about, you know, getting into my, you know, mining my friends and stuff like that, right?
Right. No, and absolutely. And you got to make sure, and that's a little bit more on the privacy side too, is making sure that all your privacy settings and everything are okay if you're figuring that out. And then when we talk about devices, it's about making sure that things aren't over the air, just like Nick talked about. I mean, when you talk about the Internet of Things, there are very different aspects of it. You have the people aspect where people have profiles on social media, on their phones, and then you also have the devices. And it's really, really hard to prevent. Because if someone wants to go and find you, there are multiple ways that we find people online. You really have to be constantly vigilant to see what's out there.
And the other side, which is kind of simplistic, and a lot of especially like email accounts are using these days, is mutual authentication. So not only do you log in with your password, you log in with something else like a token that it's sent to your phone or you have a device. Simplistic things like that greatly reduce the risk of something like that happening.
And then how does this relate then to my willingness to engage as it relates to my own privacy? So, we talked about securing the data so that someone can't steal it, and take it for bad purposes. But at the same time, my privacy, I mean, again, going back, I think you mentioned you're in the medical space, my privacy, my records, my everything, how does that relate to all this? And how do you guys manage how much privacy, companies are engaging with their customers, and how much the patients need or customers need at the end of the day? Because it seems like a balance, right? I want your data, but at the same time, I want to give you your privacy.
So that's kind of a tricky little line, because part of it is, and you realize when you talk to these companies like physicians, and when you're on the hospital side, right, they need the data. And even beyond that, products need the data to be able to function correctly. So at least from my side, it's a little less of a privacy concern and more of a, how do we ensure that we are protecting your data when we have it? So even though we have your sensitive data, we're making sure no one else can get access to it.
Is there an education then in that process to help educate the end user on what they're giving up as far as being engaged in that kind of life cycle?
Yeah, I think part of it is one, like you're saying, who are you giving access to, and what are you giving them access of, right? Mm-hmm. And the other side is awareness for all the users. So when you think of devices, and especially like in a clinical setting where you have nurses and staff that come in and view records, having something like a notification banner that says, hey, you're about to view someone's sensitive information, or you don't think anything about it. You go to press print, and you don't realize that you're printing out someone's data that you might not have been allowed to, or you have you're able to export data to removable media like USB drives, and encrypting those, much like we do at Deloitte. Any USB I stick into my laptop automatically gets encrypted these days, which limits that sensitive data getting out there.
Got it.
So if you're just joining us, I'm Robert Schmid, Deloitte Digital's Chief IoT Technologist with Rachel Moorman, and you are watching Coffee with Mr. IoT. Today we are talking about security and also now privacy. Rachel, you brought up a great point. You talked about education. I'm curious, Lucas, Nick, how much of your work is actually split between technical work like encrypting and so forth versus educational parts? Because I remember way back when security became a hot topic at my previous company, education was actually a large part. So how's that for you today, and how's that in IoT? How much of the time do you spend educating versus actually doing the hard techie stuff?
Go ahead. Yeah, I would say we do a vast majority of that. We like to build out programs, and really what a program is educating and equipping people with the tools to go and then eventually implement the more techie side, the encryption, the authentication, everything Nick was talking to. But it's really about educating people where there could be possible threats, where there could be possible holes in the systems you have, and how to make it better in the future. That's almost entirely what we do. And then we'll go back and say, okay, now that we've looked at everything you have and now we see what you need to do, now we will implement. It's that process, and making sure people are aware of everything that's going on around them, which it's hard because you don't know what you don't know, especially with all the connected devices today.
So you mentioned looking at this from a program perspective, and ideally, yes, planning from the beginning. But if I were to look at the tech stacks of most of our clients, and probably those who are looking at incorporating IoT devices, it's probably not usual, maybe I'm wrong, but at least in some cases, you're not starting from scratch, right? You're starting with an existing tech stack with entry points of its own. How do you balance out kind of maybe some of those more unsecured or older technologies And I'm thinking even specifically like where a lot of hospitals have been held ransom. And going back to, it wasn't the latest technology they installed that, you know, got held, but it was the entry points that were from older historical implementations. How does that work in a program like setting?
So take for example, the hospital example you gave with ransomware, right? So this is the common legacy device issue. What do we do with all these devices that are running XP that we can't really secure? You know, so part of this comes down to having your product security requirements at a programmatic level. So how do you address security in the devices that you're either manufacturing or that you're procuring, right? So from the procurement side, one of those requirements should be having something like network segmentation, so that knowing, especially in a hospital setting, right, I can't do anything about this legacy XP device. I can at least take it away in its own little corner of the network, so that if it is used as an access point, they can't get anywhere else. Right.
So building like a firewall in between it or something so that it can't be breached across and go, okay, makes sense. So then once you do that piece, then is that where it ends, or is there also conversations that drive maybe refreshing of technologies based on those requirements that you just mentioned?
No, yeah, that is definitely true. So then that's something that has to be ongoing. So typically a good recommendation is you quarterly revisit one, you need to have an inventory of all your devices so you can actually manage things like this.
That sounds
it's
easy.
Much more difficult than, yeah, especially when you have all these, if I tell you right now, go create an asset inventory, and not only create it, but create it at like a component level to where you know which devices are riskier than others.
Yep.
How do you go about doing that? It's a huge issue. And then, try to like scan that and not knock them all over in the process. So you might, leave this havoc behind you for trying to do something that's good. So it is a balance. So part of that is also doing your active threat intelligence. So identifying security events before they turn into
What was the term you called it?
Which part?
Active
what was
threat intelligence?
Yeah, threat intelligence. What does that mean?
Yeah, so essentially, so if I have a device, I want to know what makes up this device, right? And then I want to monitor the industry and different sources of information to identify vulnerabilities in those components before an attacker realizes what they are and exploits them before I can do anything about it. It's essentially what threat intelligence does for you.
I'm going to ask you a very, very simple question. And basically what I want to know is, so I have this theory. Let me start by saying this. I have this theory that IoT is a little bit like mobile devices. 8-10 years ago, you had to go and explain to your manager why you wanted a mobile phone. Today, nobody even asks you anymore. You show up on your day one and there's a mobile phone sitting on your desk. And so for me, it's not a question of what will be connected, what makes sense, but it's like, what are you going to start with to connect, right? It's everything will be connected. It's just going to happen. And today we make fun of it, but really it's going to be, there's lots and lots of little examples that just really start making sense. So for me, the question is, where do you start? But what I wanted to ask you was, should companies be afraid of IoT?
Robert.
I wouldn't say afraid. I'd say be cautious, like you should, right? There's data that is potentially out there that can be stolen. It can impact customers, but I wouldn't say be afraid of it. But like you said, start somewhere. Everything about security, nothing is ever going to be fully secure. It's about putting enough mechanisms in place.
Can we just pause for a second? Just say this again and explain this. Nothing will ever be secure. That's such a strange concept, yet it makes so much sense. Just talk about this for 1 second before a little bit, please.
Sure. Yeah. So there's no such thing as a perfect solution to securing data. Take something like what's considered strong encryption. It's all breakable. Or the issue is, how long does it take? You make it so hard that an attacker doesn't want to do it. So instead of something taking me a day, it takes 50 years, right? I'm not going to want to mess with that. So that's an example, right? And you want to put enough mechanisms in place to essentially deter someone from wanting to attack it, which is what's commonly called defense in depth. And this is also especially true with the threat landscape that existed yesterday is not the threat landscape that existed today. So if you were to tell someone 5 years ago about ransomware, probably they're least concerned, right? Well, what is the likelihood of that actually happening? You look at it now, it's all now top of mind with everybody. So you have to kind of adjust what you do as well along the way.
So this isn't a one and done, is what you're saying. This is a you assess your security now, and you have a plan in place to reassess on a regular cadence to make sure you're always aware of A, not only your inventory and your weaknesses, but B, what are the biggest threats, and then how do you mitigate those on a prioritized level? Because it's not like, to your point, you're not going to do everything all at once and have everything 100% secure.
Correct. And what's considered a secure solution yesterday is not necessarily a secure solution today. It's commonly...
An example?
I do. So in data integrity, right? So there's, I don't know if you're familiar with hashing algorithms. A year ago, if you had told someone to use an MD5 hash, which ultimately it takes information, puts it in another form, and it allows you to check to make sure nothing's changed at its simplest level. That's essentially what a hash does. So there was an MD5 hash, which was considered good a year ago. Someone proved that it's not so secure anymore. So now the push has moved to switch away from MD5 to SHA.
I feel like when you say they proved it's not so good anymore, that sounds like a hack.
Well, in the hashing world, it's about collisions. So if you can basically create the same number set digest from two different things, then it's not secure, because who's to say which of those is right, and it goes down that whole chain, right? But the whole idea, I know this is more in detail than we probably wanted to go, but the whole thing behind that is just saying, just because something is considered leading practice yesterday doesn't mean it's the solution you want to use tomorrow when you're building a device. And so that's also where threat intelligence and being aware and involved in the industry comes in, because you have to be able to know these things. And like you said, education, training, awareness, it's an everyday thing, especially more so in the security world than most other industries.
Got it.
So we only have a few minutes left. Basically, I just want to summarize what I heard you say is companies shouldn't be afraid. They should just start working on it and consider security a big part of it. And you also said fully secure is an illusion. There is no such thing. There is only incremental security and putting enough hindrance in place to prevent people from keeping out. I think there's another aspect to this is actually knowing when people come in and how to react to that, right? So there's this whole aspect of what do you do if something does happen? How fast can you react? But I want to actually close with a different question, and this is more of a personal question. You know, when you work in this field, I'm always curious to know, what does that mean for your personal life? What do you do in your personal life to keep yourself secure? I mean, you spend all your day helping other people to be secure. How does that impact you? So for me, I just tell you, I two-factor authenticate pretty much everything. So if my phone dies and I can't get a text, I can't log in anywhere into my email, into my bank account, into all those kind of things. So I do two-factor authentication. It's done me pretty good. I'd just like to go around the horn. Last thoughts.
Can I add on to that, Robert? I want to know, so you guys are the experts, right? So I want to know, how paranoid are you, or how paranoid do you think we are? Because like I'm bad. I let everything out there. I'm reading my credit card number on the phone in front of like an airport. Like, I'm the worst. Should I be worse? Or maybe you guys are the same because you know everything's secure in the background. Give us the inside scoop.
Lucas, you first.
Okay. No, definitely two-factor on everything, and you'd be surprised. Apple does two-factor authentication now. A lot of people don't know about that, but that gives you access to your own iMessages. So you want to make sure that's secure. Also, we were talking about private information or personality theft. There's a whole bunch of websites that you can go to, and they keep information on where you've lived, where you've worked, and you can go and request that they remove you and permanently delete you. That way no one can start to do intelligence on you, see where you've been. Maybe that's how they start to figure out and crack your passwords. I know that you lived here on this street. Now I'm going to start running it through an algorithm to figure out where your password is.
Do you actually do that though? Is that real? Like, do you have gone to those sites and done that?
Yeah, so I remove myself as much as I possibly can. And we have teams in Deloitte that use those for threat intelligence to show companies that they're that they are not secure because they have people who are visible. So you have to be careful. I'd say the last one.
Go ahead, Lucas. Sorry.
Yeah. I was just say the last point, I know we're out of time, is always check your URLs. You know, you might have a URL that says www.google.com, but if you embed something, it can really be a completely different website. So sending URLs is another big one.
Good one. Thank you, Lucas. Thanks for being with us. Nick, closing thoughts?
Secure your devices early and often, and then keep it throughout and then manage security throughout the entire life cycle. Your disposition.
Robert, I feel a little bit at risk. I think I have some afternoon activities I need to take care of. Two-pronged authorization is definitely encryption. Definitely don't do that. And yes, you can see everywhere I've lived probably. So I'm screwed. I gotta go. Sorry guys, gotta run. Gotta go do some changes on my side. What about you?
Guys, I really appreciate your time. This was Coffee with Mr. IoT every Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern. And for another one, join us next week. And if you've missed any part of today's awesome conversation about security, come and watch it on my YouTube channel.
Thanks, Lucas. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
See you later.